Right. And so you don't really rehabilitate people in prison for obvious reasons. I mean, look at the bloody places. They're great schools for crime in large. But if you keep them there until they're old enough, they tend to mature out of that, except the worst of them tend to mature out of that predatory, short-term oriented lifestyle. So,
yeah,
and that's the force issue.
Yeah, like, I agree. So fundamentally, to clear my I guess my stance up, I agree that fundamentally you're not building society on force. If for no other reason, because there'd be so much friction, it would fly apart at the seams, right? You can't force.
You get resistance if you use force.
Fundamentally, we're building off of cooperation. You want to invite people to participate in society. I agree with that. I feel like once you start to hit certain thresholds or certain points, and you've got so many different types of people involved, at some point we're going to have force around the edges on the guardrails just to make sure that we don't allow. Are you familiar with like tit for tat systems?
Very.
Yeah, tit for tat is probably a really important part of our evolutionary biological history and an important part of the animal kingdom. And I think to some degree that tit for tat punishment is important.
Is that force or justice?
You can call it what it is.
No. I'm curious what you think. This is a very serious question.
Yeah.
Because the tit for tat is very bounded, right? It's like, you cheat, I whack you, and then I cooperate, right? So, and I do think that there's a model there for what we actually conceptualize as justice.
Sure.
It's like you don't get away with it, but the goal is the reestablishment of the cooperative endeavor as fast as possible.
Of course, I agree. But in a reductionist way, we're kind of just using justice here as a stand-in for force, right?
Well,
because a tit for tat system.
That's a good.
So there are different types of tit for tat systems, right? You've got tit for tat, you've got tit for tat tat, there's all sorts of type systems where maybe you'll let somebody make a mistake 1 or 2 times, but you can't have a tit system because then somebody can come in and take advantage of it.
Yes, which is the problem with the compassionate left, by the way.
To some extent, sure, it can be. Or a problem with the right that's far too forgiving of Donald Trump. But I would say that tat part, you can call it justice. I think justice is a perspective of force, right? Where some people might consider a force to be just, the cop that arrests the murderer, and other people might consider that force, that tat, to actually be injustice because the murderer was responding to environment.
So there's something I noticed. That's why I let this part play all the way for a few minutes right there. There's something I noticed. I don't know if any of you guys noticed this. When Destiny asks Jordan Peterson a question, right? Jordan Peterson starts to answer, and then as he's still explaining, Destiny cuts him off, right? So now he cannot fully explain exactly what he was trying to do. Because midway, Jordan Peterson explaining what he's trying to say, Destiny cuts him off and then kind of switches the question in a different way. So he's like, tit for tat, right? And then as Jordan Peterson is answering the question, Destiny cuts in and he's like, tit for tat for tat. Then he's like, there are different kinds of tit for tat. And he didn't even get to answer Jordan Peterson's question of what does tit for tat mean to you? So I don't understand what Destiny's goal was for this, I guess, debate, kinda. Because, and then something else, when Destiny is talking, Jordan Peterson is listening. But when Jordan Peterson is talking, Destiny hears him, but he doesn't listen. He cuts him off and then doesn't give him the chance to explain his points. So I want you guys to catch up on that. I want you guys to catch on that, because this is where I feel like, and this is how Destiny debates. He talks fast, he cuts you off, and then midway of what you are debating, he tries to switch the question or the argument or the point of debate into a different direction, so he gets a got you moment, or to favor him. That way he seems to be like he's the right one, right? So you guys, I'm gonna let it play again, but I want you to catch on that. All right.
Environmental conditions, blah blah blah, or
that's a whatever. Stupid theory. That responding to environmental conditions theory. Because here's why it's not.
Because essentially that's Rittenhouse. It's self-defense.
So here's why. With violence. So if you assume that there's a causal pathway from early childhood abuse to criminality, let's say, which is the test case for environmental determination of the proclivity for the exploitation of others,
okay,
then it spreads near exponentially in populations. That isn't what happens. So here's the data. Most people who abused their children were abused as children. But most people who are abused as children do not abuse their children. And the reason for that is because if you were abused, there's two lessons you can learn from that. One is identify with the abuser. The other is right, exactly. And what happens, and if this didn't happen, every single family would be abusive to the core very rapidly.
Yeah.
What happens is the proclivity for violence it dampens itself out as a consequence of intergenerational transmission. So the notion that privation is a pathway to criminality, that's not a well-founded formulation. And there are an infinite number of counterexamples, and they're crucial. And some of the best people I know, and I mean that literally, are people who had childhood so absolutely abysmal that virtually anything they would have done in consequence could have been justified. And they chose not to turn into the predators of others. And that was a choice, and often one that caused them to reevaluate themselves right down to the bottom of their soul. And so that casual association of relative poverty, even with criminality, we know this too. You take a neighborhood where there's relative poverty, the young men get.
That was the longest segment where Jordan Peterson was talking and Destin didn't interrupt him at all.